When the living embodiment of grit and grace sits face to face with one of television's most unfiltered hosts, sparks are inevitable, but no one in the studio expected an inferno. What began as a routine interview quickly became a brutal test of patience, wit, and dignity, as Clint Eastwood found himself under relentless fire from Joy Behar, and the legend showed why you never, ever poke the lion too many times. The View studio was alive with an electric hum as audience members settled into their seats. Every chair was taken, and every phone was poised to record. This morning was special. Clint Eastwood, the man whose name alone commanded reverence, was in the building. At 94, he walked onto the stage as though he owned it, not with arrogance, but with a quiet, powerful confidence born of a lifetime staring down villains, doubters, and cameras alike. Dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored navy suit, he nodded once to the audience. His steely squint met with thunderous applause. Across from him sat Joy Behar, wearing her signature glasses and an expression already sharpened for battle. To the audience, it might have seemed like just another spirited episode. But to those who knew Joy's ways, that glint in her eye meant she was not here to celebrate Clint. She was here to confront him. "Clint Eastwood," Joy began, her voice already dripping with something between sarcasm and defiance. "Welcome to The View. It's not every day we have a cowboy grace our little table." Clint offered her a small, polite smile. "Well, Joy, I figured it was time to visit the ranch," he said in that gravelly baritone, the audience chuckling warmly. But Joy didn't chuckle. Instead, she leaned forward, fingers steepled, and fired the first real shot. "You've made a career out of playing cowboys and cops who solve their problems with guns. Don't you think it's time to hang up the hat and let the next generation take over? Maybe Hollywood's had enough of your type." Clint's smile barely flickered, though his jaw tightened ever so slightly. "My type? You mean someone who does his job, tells good stories, and tries not to talk down to people? Well, Joy, it seems the audience disagrees with you." A few audience members even clapped at that, but Joy waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You've been coasting on the same squint and six-shooter since the 60s. Don't you think it's getting tired?" Clint tilted his head as if sizing up an opponent in a duel. His reply was calm but cutting. "Funny thing about stories that last 60 years, Joy. They're called classics. Maybe that's why people still watch them." Joy rolled her eyes theatrically, but the audience reaction, another small cheer, clearly irritated her. She pressed on. "All right, Clint," she continued, flipping through her cards. "You directed $1 Million Baby, which some critics, including me, said was overrated. A film about boxing? Really? Don't you think it was just another one of your testosterone-fueled vanity projects?" Clint's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back, folding his hands in his lap. "You know, Joy," he said evenly, "that little vanity project won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Not bad for a tired old cowboy, huh?" Laughter and applause erupted around the studio, but Joy was undeterred. She was hunting now, and the scent of conflict was too sweet for her to back off. "You see," she said, her voice rising above the crowd noise. "That's what I'm talking about. Hollywood gives statues to men like you for telling the same story over and over again. Where's the creativity? Where's the progress? Do you even care about what the younger generation wants to see?" Clint sat perfectly still, letting her words hang in the air like the stench of gunpowder after a gunfight. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried. "You're confusing trends with substance," he said. "Trends come and go. Good stories stay. Maybe you'd understand that if you spent less time yelling and more time listening." The audience gasped audibly at that, and even a few of Joy's co-hosts exchanged wary glances. "But Joy," she leaned back, a bitter smile curling her lips. "Oh, so now you're telling me to listen? To a man who's been glorifying violence and machismo his whole life? To a man whose films teach men to solve everything with fists and bullets?" Clint's gaze hardened, though his composure never wavered. He sat forward just slightly, fixing her with that iconic stare that had silenced countless foes before her. "My films," he replied coolly, teach that violence has a cost, that there are consequences to every choice. Maybe you'd know that if you'd actually watch them instead of just reading the headlines. The audience roared at that, and for the first time, Joy faltered, but only for a heartbeat. "Oh, I've seen enough," she shot back, voice sharp as broken glass. "Enough to know that you're just another relic from a time when men thought the world revolved around them. This isn't your world anymore, Clint." For the first time all morning, Clint smiled. Not warm, not mocking, but something much colder. The kind of smile you give someone right before you outdraw them at high noon. "Maybe," he said, "but it seems I'm still here, and you're still trying to catch up." The studio exploded in applause and gasps as Joy flushed bright red, her eyes narrowing to slits. Clint leaned back, calm as ever, while Joy fumbled for her next attack. The producers in the control room exchanged frantic looks, wondering if they should cut to commercial already. But they didn't, because everyone in the room knew this was just the beginning. The studio air had grown thick. You could almost hear hearts pounding under the applause, under the silence. Joy Behar was rattled, but not beaten. Not yet. What started as a battle of words was turning into a full-blown spectacle as Joy doubled down on her insults, trying everything she could to crack Clint Eastwood's legendary composure. As the applause from Clint's last line faded, the studio settled into an uneasy quiet. Joy Behar sat stiffly in her chair, shuffling her cue cards, her lips pressed into a thin line. Even the producers behind the glass looked tense, hands hovering over buttons to cut to commercial if this confrontation went completely off the rails. But Joy didn't retreat. Oh no. She leaned forward again, her eyes gleaming with a kind of reckless determination. "Well," she said with a sharp edge, "you seem awfully confident for someone whose entire career was built on cliches. I mean, really, Clint, do you ever get tired of playing the same old rugged, brooding, gunslinging, emotionally stunted man in every movie? Or is that just who you are?" Clint tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady and cool as marble. "You call them cliches," he said. "I call them truths people recognize. You can dress it up in fancy words, Joy, but grit and honor don't go out of style." Joy let out a short, bitter laugh. "Oh, please. You think grit and honor are all it takes? That's the problem with you old-school Hollywood guys. You think you're deeper than you really are. You think scowling at a camera makes you a philosopher." Clint's lip twitched, but not quite into a smile. "Maybe it doesn't," he allowed, "but it seems to bother you an awful lot for someone who claims not to care." That earned another ripple of laughter from the audience, the kind Joy could no longer ignore. "All right, fine," she snapped, flipping to another card. "Let's talk about Million Dollar Baby, a movie about a woman who, spoiler alert, gets paralyzed after chasing her stupid dream. And you, the big hero, help her end her life. Tell me, Clint, how is that empowering? How is that not just another depressing tale of a woman who couldn't make it without a man?" Clint's eyes narrowed slightly, his voice dropping lower. "It's not about a man or a woman," he said. "It's about choices, about sacrifice, and about loving someone enough to honor their wishes, even when it breaks your own heart." His words hit like a hammer. The audience quieted, some visibly moved, but Joy pressed on, her tone rising, her frustration boiling over. "Oh, come on," she barked. "That's just more macho posturing, wrapped up in fake sensitivity. You've spent your entire career pretending to care while cashing checks from the same old macho fantasy machine. Don't pretend otherwise." Clint's gaze hardened. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to command the space between them. "Pretend?" he repeated, voice like steel. "Joy, you've been pretending this entire time. Pretending this is about me. Pretending it's about my movies, my career, my values. But it's not, is it? It's about you, about proving something, about showing the world how tough and righteous you are by tearing someone else down." Joy froze for half a second before letting out a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, that's rich," she spat. "The stoic cowboy psychoanalyzing me. I don't need you to tell me who I am, Clint. I know exactly who I am. A woman who calls out hypocrisy when she sees it. A woman who refuses to be cowed by some Hollywood dinosaur who thinks he's better than everyone else. Clint shook his head slowly, almost pityingly. Then why do you sound so desperate to convince yourself? He asked quietly. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Joy's face went crimson, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. Oh, don't you dare, she hissed. Don't you sit there and act like you're some noble sage here to teach me about myself. You're just an actor, a lucky old man who wrote a few good roles into some undeserved legend status. Clint finally sat back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other, utterly unruffled. Well, he said evenly, that undeserved legend status seems to bother you more than it does weeping. The studio erupted, some clapping, some gasping, some too stunned to react at all. Joy's voice rose above the din. You think you're clever, don't you? You think you're so calm and collected. But underneath it all, you're just like every other man, afraid of losing relevance, afraid of becoming obsolete, afraid of someone like me telling you that your time is up. Clint fixed her with the kind of look that could silence a raging bull. Joy, he said quiet but clear, my time isn't up, but I can see you're running out of yours. That line cut through the room like a blade. Even Joy's co-host looked away uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their notes. For a moment, just a moment, Joy looked shaken, but she recovered quickly, slamming her cards down onto the table and leaning forward again, fire in her eyes. You want to play hardball, Clint? She sneered. Fine, let's talk about your precious legacy. Violence, guns, toxic masculinity. You've poisoned generations of men with your macho nonsense. And now here you sit, smug and untouchable, acting like you've done the world a favor. Clint leaned in too, their faces just feet apart, his voice so soft it forced the entire room to lean in to hear. And yet, he said, here you sit, trying so hard to tear me down and still not tall enough to reach me. The audience gasped, then fell silent. Joy sat back slowly, her lips pressed tight, her hands trembling slightly. Clint remained where he was, calm, composed, unbothered. The tension was now so thick it felt like a storm was about to break. And everyone watching knew this was only going to get worse before it got better. You could almost hear the oxygen leave the room. Clint Eastwood's quiet retort had left Joy Behar visibly shaken, but only for a second. Then the storm returned, fiercer than before. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a battle for dignity, and Joy wasn't going to let Clint walk away with the upper hand, even if it meant burning the whole set down around them. Joy Behar adjusted her glasses, her jaw tight, her lips pressed into a hard line as she leaned forward over the table, closing the gap between her and Clint. Oh, you think you're so clever, don't you? She began, her voice low and venomous now, dropping the usual quippy sarcasm for something much darker. You think that quiet little cowboy act still works? That it still intimidates people? Clint didn't flinch. He simply straightened his jacket and replied evenly, Joy, I don't have to intimidate anyone. You're doing a fine job of making yourself look small or all by yourself. A ripple of murmurs ran through the audience. The co-hosts stared down at their notes or avoided looking at either of them altogether. Joy's cheeks flushed crimson, but she pressed on, louder now, determined not to lose control again. You know what I think? She shot back, her voice rising. I think you're scared. Scared that the world's finally catching up to you. That people are realizing you're nothing but a relic of a toxic era that should have ended decades ago. Clint's eyes narrowed just slightly, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. You keep calling me a relic, Joy, he said slowly. But what does that make you? Sitting here trying to tear down someone who's done more in his lifetime than you've done in your career. The audience erupted into another wave of gasps and whispers. Joy's hands slammed down onto the table with a sharp crack. That's rich, she barked. Coming from a man who built his entire career playing the same damn character over and over, the silent, brooding brute who solves every problem with his fists or his gun. You glorified violence and called it art. Clint nodded once, a humorless smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You're right about one thing, he said evenly. I've played a lot of flawed men, violent men, but if you'd actually watched any of those movies past the first 10 minutes, you'd see they're about what it costs a man to live that way. You're accusing me of glorifying what I've spent my career exposing. For the first time, Joy faltered, just for a breath, but she recovered and leaned in closer, her voice dropping into a hiss. "Don't you dare lecture me about art," she spat. "Your films are just excuses for insecure men to feel tough. You're nothing more than a mascot for the worst kind of masculinity. And here you are, still playing the same role in real life because you don't know how to be anything else." Clint's eyes flashed with something cold and hard, a storm brewing behind them. But he still didn't raise his voice. "You seem awfully sure of who I am," he said softly. "It's a shame you haven't spent half as much time figuring out who you are." That landed like a hammer. Even Joy's co-hosts stiffened in their chairs. But Joy only got louder, refusing to give him an inch. "Oh, please," she scoffed, throwing her hands up. "I know exactly who I am. I've spent my life standing up to bullies like you. Men who think they can silence women with a glare and a one-liner. I've been calling out your type since before you even knew how to say go ahead. Make my day." Clint's gaze didn't waver. He leaned forward, lowering his voice so the entire room had to lean in just to catch the words. "And yet," he murmured, "here you are. Still yelling, still trying to prove something, still mistaking noise for strength." Joy froze, momentarily robbed of speech. The audience's murmurs grew louder, the tension now electric. Joy's hands shook slightly as she grabbed another card from the stack on the table, trying to regain control. "All right," Joy snapped. "Let's talk about your so-called masterpieces, shall we? Dirty Harry, a violent cop who breaks the law to get his way. Unforgiven, a drunk murderer who somehow gets painted as a hero. $1 Million Baby, a movie about a woman who dies because her dream was too big. That's your legacy, Clint. Violence, pain, failure, and somehow you're proud of it." Clint's jaw flexed once, his hands folding together on the table. He stared at her for a long moment before answering. "My legacy," he said finally, his voice low and measured, "is telling the truth. Even when it's ugly. Even when people like you can't handle it. I don't make movies for approval. I make them for the people who recognize themselves in them. The broken, the struggling, the ones trying to do better. You don't have to like that, but you don't get to rewrite it either." Joy sneered, her voice dripping with derision. "Oh, please," she said, almost shouting now. "You're just another old man clinging to relevance because you're too afraid to face the fact that the world has moved on without you. You should have retired years ago. You should have left before you embarrassed yourself." For the first time, Clint stood up, slowly, deliberately, his full height and presence filling the studio. The audience gasped and fell silent. He leaned forward just slightly, his eyes locked on Joy's, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "Joy," he said evenly, "I've never needed to chase relevance, and I don't need your permission to keep doing what I love. But you might want to ask yourself what happens when the cameras stop rolling and there's nobody left to clap for you." Joy's face blanched, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly it looked painful. For a long moment, the two just stared at each other, the air between them thick with unspoken words. And then Clint straightened, buttoned his jacket, and calmly sat back down, never breaking eye contact. The entire studio felt like it was holding its breath, and everyone knew the final act of this confrontation was about to begin. No one in the studio moved. Every eye was fixed on Clint Eastwood and Joy Behar as the final round of their clash loomed. The air was heavy, not with noise, but with the quiet certainty that something irreversible was about to happen. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was the kind of moment that defines careers and leaves reputations in ruins. Joy broke the silence first. Her voice cracked slightly as she forced a laugh. "Oh, what's the matter, Clint? Running out of clever little lines? Or are you just realizing that the world doesn't revolve around you anymore?" Clint didn't even flinch. He simply rose to his feet again, slowly removing his microphone. "You know," he said calmly, "when I walked in here today, I thought I was sitting down with professionals. I thought we'd talk about my work, my craft, maybe even have a little fun. But instead, you've turned this into a spectacle. Joy shot back, her voice shrill now. You don't get to play the victim here, Clint. Not after everything you've done, the movies you've made, the messages you've sent. You don't get to act like you're above criticism. Clint held her gaze, his expression unreadable. Criticism is fine, he replied, his voice still steady. What you've done here isn't criticism, it's bitterness. And I don't have to stand here and soak up another second of it. Joy started to respond, but Clint cut her off, his words quiet but absolute. You invited me here as a guest, and you treated me like an enemy. So I'll save you the trouble of kicking me out. With that, he set the microphone down on the table with deliberate care. Good luck with your show, he added. But if you're wondering why people stop coming back, you might want to replay this episode and take a good hard look. The studio went silent as Clint walked off the set, leaving Joy frozen in her chair, her face pale with a mix of rage and humiliation. As the door closed behind him, the audience erupted, some in applause, some in shocked whispers, but everyone knowing they had just witnessed a moment that would be talked about for years. And that's how Clint Eastwood walked out of The View with his dignity intact and left Joy Behar to reckon with the consequences of her own bitterness. What do you think? Did Clint go too far, or was he justified in walking out? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Echo Stories for more unforgettable moments from Hollywood and beyond. Until next time, stay curious and stay classy.